Okay. Meow meow, kitty cats. We'll see how this goes. I have somebody showing up in a little bit, maybe to move an internet wire. So this might be a terrible idea, but it's something I want to do and I didn't have time for because I've been talking to some people about this clip from Jordan Peterson's conversation with Brett Weinstein and Heather Hying. And there's a particular section where they talk about brick in the wall science, and they talk about center and fringe and how consciousness changes. And I think it's I see it very in line with spiral dynamics. What up, Neil? I've shared this with Neil. There's a private video that I made because I don't know if, or it's unlisted because I don't know if how serious Jordan Peterson is. From what Paul says, he's fairly serious about pulling down stuff. So I'll just do a commentary on it because apparently you can do that, and we'll go from there. And I'll maybe have to shut this down or leave, and we'll have to see. There's a number of things I want to talk about up front. Again, rules. If I open this up, no talking over each other, staying relatively focused on topic, and I get to adjudicate that because I'm Judge Dredd. I'm Sly Stallone as Judge Dredd. And then the other things I want to talk about, some shout outs, promos. Karen Wong spoke with Clara, and Lauren on the Meaning Code channel, which were a couple nice young ladies, young women from the Northwestuary conference who I wasn't able to meet while I was up there. I didn't talk to them. It's always, whatever. It's the sex dynamics in general. I was overwhelmed with people to talk to, like everyone was. But also, I'm not gonna go up to a woman alone and who isn't like Sherry or Karen or something who I know and like talk to them. Although I'd be inclined to do that because I love new people. I love integrating people, but that's weird. At least to me, feels awkward. So I don't want to do it. So it was nice to meet them through Karen and get to hear more about them in that conversation. I feel like it was a really great conversation. And PBK treated Karen's Northwestuary talk this morning on his channel with a little intro. And I very much agree with PBK's assessment of Karen and her channel, and that she does a combination of really interesting things over there. Rando's conversations. I think I had one conversation with Karen about technological babble back in the day, which is interesting because in this clip with Jordan Peterson, they essentially talk about babble and one aspect of what I would call technological babble, which is a very old idea of mine. I was going to write a book about it like 10 years ago or something, and I didn't for a variety of reasons. So that conversation's awesome. Jacob Federici's our little corner estuary monster. Peterson's fear monster was he did a conversation with Clara destroyed with facts and logic, which was cool because I got to know more about her whole thing and like really sitting down and going through the legalese of this research study she's doing. I found out that she's getting her PhD at Notre Dame. That's cool. And I don't know. There's a lot of interesting things in there. So I advise you to check that out if you're a TLC junkie. A lot of good things in there. And then what else did I plug? There's another video. What was it? That's maybe all. Okay, let's start some of this. And so this is from Jordan Peterson's conversation with Brett and Heather, entitled, I don't even remember what it's entitled. It's in the full video is in the link. I think I have it queued up where it starts to the approximate place. Let's roll and see how this goes.
This So what you do when you call in a large language model is you put forward a call to make a form of knowledge that's implicit in the statistical relationships between the ideas explicit. Okay, but what you make explicit in that manner is dependent on your aim. It's dependent on the question you ask. So you could say that with a large language model, they game them so they're politically correct. But independently of that, that the answer you get will be dependent on the question that you ask. So then you could say, well, the answer you get is dependent on the spirit of the question that you ask. I think the same thing that happens to us in relationship to our own unconscious is that the answer you get, the revelatory answer you get when an idea emerges in the phenomenological landscape, you get an answer from the spirit you call upon by the spirit of your question. So think this has a very weird implication. I'm very curious about what you guys think about this. And I'm not saying that this is definitive, but it means in a way that if you strived to gather information in the manner that was aiming at the highest possible good, right? Truly, then the revelations that you receive from the unconscious are going to be in that spirit. And what that means, this is such a weird thing. I don't know what to make of it. It means that you could call upon God and he would answer even if he didn't exist. And then I think, well, this is weird because there's an insistence in almost all in deep religious representations of the divine, is that whatever the divine is neither real nor non-real, right? It transcends those categories. And yeah, and so, well, I've walked myself into that logical corner and I can't see any way out of it. It's a very peculiar thing to contemplate, because you can imagine. So, and you know that you do this when you're trying to generate hypotheses as a scientist, right? If you're a real scientist, you sit and you think, okay, what's my wish? What's my prayer? I hope that I can evaluate this landscape of data. Does that be the perceptual landscape? I hope I can negotiate it in the spirit of truth, not being contaminated by my ambition, my desire to raise myself in the esteem of my colleagues, to take revenge on people who criticized my ideas in the past, to show pridefully that I'm intelligent. I want to move all those spirits out of the inquiry landscape, and I want to generate a hypothesis that's in the spirit of the truth. And I think the better you are at clearing your head, so to speak, the more likely you are to do that. So anyways, I will leave that to you guys to
much to respond to there. Let me just go to the last point first, and then I was thinking exactly this, that many years ago when people were claiming that what we needed was more diversity in science because that would solve.
Okay, I want to pause this. Heather says something I don't really like. I don't really agree with right away. I mean, it's a little, maybe I'm hearing her incorrectly, but so a lot, T-Grog, if you're out there, my friend, a lot of what they're talking about is the intro clip of Jonathan Peugeot's talk with Vervaeke about how science by its very nature is imaginal or rationality, because with rationality you want to be more reasonable, and so you have to put yourself in the imaginal space where rationality plays in order to even do rationality. And a lot of this has to do with the medium is the message, and the medium and where you are, the space where you are, shapes the kinds of things that can emerge in that space, the womb where you are. So like if you're not in a space that asks the right questions, and Heather goes on to say something that I think is totally wrong. It will illustrate, well, and again, I could be wrong in the way that I'm hearing her, but she goes on to say something that I think illustrates kind of the opposite of this. And Jordan is able conversationally, I think, to not focus on that, but then to shape and change the conversation a little bit, because Heather goes on to talk about, which I'll just play, that the whole idea of science is that even if you, what does she say? That is constancy in results. It's like no matter what you're trying to do or accomplish, you'll get the same results. But Jordan just said, if you're not asking the right questions, you won't get the same right results. So, okay, I'm fumbling over this. Let me keep going here.
The problems that they saw in science, more diversity of, sex and race and such. The answer that I quickly arrived at was that should not affect the answers that we are getting, but it would affect the questions that are being asked, because scientists get to choose the questions that they are asking precisely in the way that you are saying. And the scientific process is the best way we have, inefficient and...
Okay, here. Scientists get to choose the questions they're asking. I don't think so. Where do the questions that you're asking emerge from? Do they emerge from a place that is dependent on your choice, on your will? I mean, this goes back to choice again. What about salience? I mean, this is all the stuff Jordan Peterson talks about and Vervaeke talks about and everything else. Salience. Why does something appear to you? Why can you see a certain question and not a certain question? And this is where Jordan will go. This is the place I want to go when he talks about creativity versus brick in the wall science. So like what you just said, I don't think is right. Scientists get to choose the questions. I mean, no, they don't. They can only choose amongst the questions they can see. What if they can't see the right questions? This gets in the creative thing. All right.
Flawed as it is, to arrive at answers that no matter who...
Okay, I'm going to back up.
That you are saying. And the scientific process is the best way we have, inefficient and flawed as it is, to arrive at answers that no matter who is asking the questions, they get to the same answers.
No,
and so
see, that I don't agree with at all.
How is it that...
Because it's just so wrong.
and flawed, and the scientific process is the best way we have, inefficient and flawed as it is.
See, she keeps making all the caveats. The scientific method is the best, as flawed as it is, that no matter who's asking the questions, they get at the same answers. That is such a faith position. It's just such a faith position. Like a religious person, an overtly religious person, and this is the whole conversation saying that science is a religious paradigm. You have faith in science. And it's that Joe Rogan conversation with Faraz Zahabi where they debate science for like an hour, over an hour. And he says science is the faith that the future will behave like the past, given all the same constraints. It's empiricism with narrative laid on top. Because science is not empiricism. Science is not straight phenomenology. It's not observation of things that happen to you. It's a narrative laid on top of that. It's paradigmatic, to use Jordan Hall's term. And it's fundamentally not creative to bring in Graham Pardun and that Nikolai Berdyaev quote about creativity being opposed to idolatry, which a lot of people didn't like, potentially Anselman. But I make the distinction between creativity, true art, which is also what Malcolm Guite talks about in a video on my channel, which you can see from his George MacDonald and the Imagination essay. And it's a shorter clip video that I made on my channel about that art, true art, doesn't so much as convey meaning as awakens meaning, which is related to receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. And this is why I say all meaning, the person is the nexus and the locus of all meaning. You will not understand the meaning crisis until you understand that all meaning is personal. Meaning is not information. Meaning is value of the relevant information, which you could say is almost like wisdom. Let us attend. Okay. Heather is like, this comment just, this is why you can be, it's funny because like she'll go on to talk about brick in the wall science. There are brick in the wall thinkers who are not creative enough, I would say, to see that they are stuck, that they can't think their way out of a prison made of thought. Okay, let's continue. I don't know. It just, all right, here we go. Buffering.
To arrive at answers that no matter who is asking the questions, they get to the same answers.
I just want to play it again because it's so bad.
And the scientific process is the best way we have, inefficient and flawed as it is, to arrive at answers that no matter who is asking the questions, they get to the same answers. And so, like, how is it that we can recognize what our interests are as much as possible and say, okay, I'm going to, whether or not you're asking God or something else or trying to do scientific inquiry, I'm going to recognize that this is me asking a question, and that I come with my own biases and perceptual history and senses, and there's no getting around that. I can try to understand it as much as possible, but the question will, at the end of the day, come from me or from you or from you, and then we can apply tools, enlightenment tools, if you will, by which to answer the question that I came up with in a way such that you then, or you, or you, or you, could ask the same question that I came up with and get the same answer.
Right.
But the question itself changes based on who.
See, Jordan doesn't agree.
Well, so you're pointing to, I think, something that's scandalous in relationship to our analysis of the scientific process within the scientific domain. Now, Thomas Kuhn popped out of this a little bit, and there's been other people working on it. But, when I was a graduate student, there was a lot that was taught to me with regards to scientific method and data analysis and ethical rigor in relationship to those. But the issue of hypothesis generation was just treated as a given. And this is really a strange thing, because it's not only half of the scientific endeavor, it's more like 80%.
It's necessary, if not sufficient.
Well, and also, geniuses ask the right questions, right? I mean, it's a big deal. And see, you made a case for the postmodernist critique of.
Okay, here's the part we want to get at. He says geniuses. It depends on what you mean by genius. If you're just talking about IQ or mere intellectual ability in like what IQ tests, I don't know. I would love to know more about Jordan's. He talks about creativity and how they measure creativity and his studies on creativity. I would love to know a lot more about that, because he says creativity is essentially pattern recognition. And I'll let him talk because he does a better job. And then I'll engage in some of the comments here because people are asking me stuff, which I want to engage with. But this section, I'm going to rewind it. Creatives ask the right questions. Creatives. And Jordan's doing a good job navigating this, actually. Okay, let's go back. Sorry.
And also, geniuses ask the right questions, right? I mean, it's a big deal. And see, you made a case for the postmodernist critique of science in some way, and where science was weak was on the rationale for hypothesis generation. Now, there are people who say, well, it's just algorithmic. You read the research literature and you can figure out the next incremental step. And that's actually true. You can often figure out the next incremental step, but that doesn't make you the kind of genius that leaps the field forward.
That's what I call brick in the wall science. If you want to continue building the wall that we already have, then you can maybe put another brick in that wall of scientific understanding. But if it turns out the house that you're building is on the wrong foundation, you'll never get there that way.
Yeah, exactly. Or you'll build a Tower of Babel, because that's what that story's about. Yeah, exactly. Babel. And so there are levels of revolution. There are revolutionary levels in hypothesis generation, and the great geniuses are better at identifying patterns at a more fundamental level. And that's not something that you can predict algorithmically merely as a consequence of mastery of the relevant literature, even though that's helpful.
You cannot predict what he's calling a genius or a highly creative person will see that will completely leap things forward, like Einstein, Galileo. But this isn't just applied to science. It could be religious thinkers. You cannot see what you can't see because you're not looking for the right stuff. But geniuses will see patterns, and Peterson will go on and talk about this a lot more, that no one else can see. And he says, he'll get into center and fringe, and he's like, this is like Terrence Howard, perhaps on Rogan. Like Terrence Howard is going to see stuff that nobody else is seeing, and he might be wrong about a lot of things because he's seeing all sorts of patterns. He's seeing things that are both true and probably not true. But like when he's right, he's going to be massively right in a way that changes the world in a way that nobody else could do, because they're algorithmically, they're thinking in a systemic way. This, then this, then this, then this, then this. They are giving, it's prescribed, scripted. This is why I talk about going off script. It is formulaic, it's left-brained, it's highly patterned, it's highly what's the word? Formulaic thinking. And highly creative people won't do that. They see something completely different. And that's the George MacDonald quote that I love to quote so much. It's like, I'm sorry I can't explain the thing to you. I barely apprehend it myself. And most people, there's a lot of people will not see, or even, this is why a lot of geniuses and brilliant artists aren't acknowledged until they're dead. They're ahead of their time. It's why, like, Owen Barfield, people don't read Owen Barfield because they don't even know what he's talking about. Okay, let's continue. He says this very well.
Helpful. And I think fundamental level. And that's not something that you can predict algorithmically merely as a consequence of mastery of the relevant literature, even though that's helpful. And I think that's, Heather, I think that's associated with trait openness. Because, well, and openness, by the way, does not predict scientific productivity. We did a study. It's zero. The correlation is zero. Conscientiousness does, and that's brick in the wall science. But so imagine this. So imagine a neurological network.
Okay, so that's such an interesting point. Let's go back. I want to just play that again. Jordan says a lot of things, and Brett says this at the end. He's like, Jordan, you said about 51 things that deserve their own podcast. And this is what Jordan does. Because Jordan is, I don't know. I used to talk about these 3 levels of thinkers, like shamans, poets, mystics, and then there's like integrators, and then there are like ditch digger people that just apply what the integrators bring in. The shamans and the mystics are these high-level creatives, high in openness that he's talking about. People that see things that nobody else is seeing. And then there are integrators, people that are able to just like barely apprehend. They can barely see what the creatives are talking about. And then they integrate that and they repeat it and they simplify it. This is that Chris Green video. This is exactly what this Chris Green video is about. That's on my channel. The second to last one. It's like a 5-minute video where he's talking to PBK and he says, this is the people that simplify stuff. And he says he used to get complimented all the time because you made that so simple. But what Chris says is like, what I realize is that if something is really complex and something has nuance and I simplify it, I do damage to it. I do violence to it. I'm not being faithful to saving the appearances, to representing, remembering what the thing actually is. You're dumbing it down. It's like taking it's the opposite of a painting, of a landscape, of a brilliant portrait or landscape painting, which contains more than a mirror image because it's through multiple sittings. Remember when Jordan Peterson talked about sitting for a portrait with a master artist through multiple sittings, is you capture the essence of someone rather than just like a static representation. And often, Chris Green says that often academia, this is what I call smart dumb people, has systemically valued and put forward and rewarded people that simplify stuff. And then you just get people that are regurgitating simplifications of things and conflating that with understanding. And back to the George MacDonald quote is he's just like, I'm saying, you think you understand things because you have familiarity with them. And of course you must, because there they are. You have unavoidable relations with them. But do not conflate your familiarity with things with understanding. They're not the same thing. And the fact is no man understands anything. When he understands that and has the humility to understand that, then he can be open to the truth outside the truth that he currently apprehends. Okay, sorry. I'm going into Luke-isms, but that's because Jordan is talking about the stuff I always talk about. Okay, we're going to go back.
This does, and that's brick in the wall science. But so imagine this. So imagine a neurological network where there's a probability that any given, this is a function, there's a probability that any given idea will activate another idea. Okay, so that would be like fluency. The more fluent you are, the more ideas are activated whenever you're fed an idea. But then there's distance from the original idea. And you can calculate this as statistical improbability. And there are tests of creativity that do this. So the open people are more likely to leap to divergent associations with any given
Wow.
idea. And the more open.
This is so good. All this stuff is so good. I have this. Just go and watch this section over and over and over and over and over. Because what he's saying right here is like, if I really believe this, if you understand what he's talking about, this is so important to what's going on in the world. This is so important. What he's talking about almost is like, it touches on iconic thinking. It would eliminate ideological possession. If you understood what he was talking about, it would eliminate ideological possession. It understood it in the way knowing as you are known, understood it properly, embodied this. Because these highly creative people, they make these massive jumps that other people can't. Think Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Think particle in a wave. Think non-duality. Highly creative people make these highly divergent jumps. And I'm going to rewind it so you can keep listening. But I was thinking it's Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. It's particle and wave. It's the same thing. It's the same fractal phenomenon, but just in thinking and seeing. But you see this materially. And like, here's the thing. Deep calls to deep. If you have nothing in you for understanding what he's talking about or what I'm talking about, you can't see what I'm saying. And there's no mammon. There's no technique. There's no tool. There's no words that I can say because I can't convey meaning. I can only awaken meaning in you. If you don't see what I'm saying, there's nothing I can do about it. I can try to say it in other ways and bring in other pieces, but like the meaning is inside you. And I don't mean that materially. Receive with meekness the implanted word. All meaning is personal. Sorry, I'm doing highly divergent pattern mapping. Okay, let's go back.
From the original idea. And you can calculate this as statistical improbability. And there are tests of creativity that do this. So the open people are more likely to leap to divergent associations with any given idea. And the more open they are, the more divergent those are going to be. And the more divergent they are, the more probability of them being wrong, but also revolutionary, right? And so, right. And so that's really what we see as creativity. And it's something like, maybe it's something akin to mutation probability. Like the high open people mutate their ideas not only much more frequently, but also much more radically. And Brett, I read a paper a while back that a friend of mine sent me showing that there's a hierarchy of mutational repair in the genome.
Absolutely is. Absolutely is.
Yeah, so that's
adaptively scheduled.
Right. So that's very much akin to what we were discussing earlier about the notion that there are foundational ideas that are established by tradition with a penumbra of variation around them. And so it turns out that the more deadly a mutation would be to a given gene, the more likely it is that that particular gene will be repaired with 100% accuracy if it mutates. And so that's a way different view than the simpler,
of course.
What would you say? Yes, it's way different. It's radically different. Experimentation occurs on the fringes, which is why we've had this body plan for how long has it been? 60 million years? Is that right?
Mammals, 90, 100 million years-ish. Yeah.
Yeah. And when was the base with this basically symmetric? It's even older than that, right?
500 million.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, and it's variations on a theme from 500 million years. Yeah.
All
so
right.
the question is, what's fundamental and what can be varied without cost?
You're killing me, Jordan. You have said in the last 15 minutes, you've said 51 things that each need a podcast unto themselves to explore. So I want to go back to a few of them if I can recall what they were. Because
all right, that's it. That's the video. I mean, it's the section that I think is amazing. Within that I just think it's so, what he's talking about there is so important. It's very, very important. Okay. I'm going to go and look at some comments and open this thing up. Ooh, also, look at this fun book that I found on my run. So I think this is a national thing, but Minneapolis has all these like little, what are they called? Little bookstores around neighborhoods that people build, like little, not bookstores, little libraries around neighborhoods. This book The Psychology of Consciousness, Robert Ornstein. It's so phenomenal. And the back of it is, I'm just like, God loves me. Because that's how you can tell God loves you. He gives you what you want. That's sarcasm. But I just want to read the back of this because it's so phenomenal. And I'm going to look at comments and then open this up. This book is the book is the attempt to reconcile two basic approaches. This is very Ian McGilchrist stuff. I mean, look at all that. And it's very related to everything that was just said in creativity and right brain, left brain dynamics. Because brick in the wall is left brain. I mean, it just is. And so I'll read this. So this says, this book is an attempt to reconcile two basic approaches to knowledge, the rational and the intuitive. Central to its theme is the concept of a bifunctional brain in man. The left hemisphere of the human brain controls the right side of the body. The right hemisphere controls the left side. Modern psychological and physiological research indicates, however, that there are far more significant differences in the functioning of the two parts of the brain. In the left hemispheres of most human brains seem to be placed the functions of language, rational cognition, and time sense functions. The author describes as linear. Think of that second quote that I've been obsessing over from Graham Pardon's conversation from Vine Deloria Jr. about time. And if you focus on time, you lose the ability to think about space. And think about that related to McLuhan and the medium is the message. I'm doing big jumps here. But I think I have it saved in here. Do I? The Vine Deloria Jr. quote. Maybe I can't find it. Well, anyhow, it's around. I'll maybe post it just in my community channel later. I have them saved in comments under Graham's video, but anyhow, okay. So time. So in the left hemispheres of most human brains seem to be placed the functions of language, rational cognition, and time sense functions the author describes as linear. And linear is a projection, or time is a projection. Time and space are related. I mean, this is Einstein. This is science, maybe. It is the right hemisphere in most cases that seems to be responsible for nonlinear or nonverbal thinking, the unconscious. Peterson touched on that. It's also Cormac McCarthy's video that I have on the unconscious. For unconscious thinking, intuition, spatial relationships, and the direction of many bodily activities, including painting and sculpting. Proceeding from this conceptualization, Professor Ornstein analyzes Western thought in the left hemisphere dominated, oriented toward verbal and mathematical rationality. Eastern thought, particularly as manifested in yoga and Zen, is seen as primarily influenced by the right hemisphere. Though through research accounts and allegories, through discussions of personal experience and questioning of the reader, Ornstein uses the theme of right brain, left brain to provoke a basic reexamination of what we know and feel about the psychology of consciousness. All right, I'm going to go and look at comments, open this up. I don't know how long I have today because somebody's showing up. I got a tech coming. So I'm digging an egress window and I have an internet cord running right through it. Yeah, truth is a person. So this is funny. Like, see how much traction this got. And this, I would argue that because a lot of people are brick in the wall thinkers, this tweet didn't get. So I tweeted this the other day. Whatever. I don't have that many followers. But I tweeted last night, and I don't know how this came to me, but I was thinking something. It was a conversation I had at dinner, and one of my kids said something, and I was just like, oh, this is good. And I think this is true. I think this is very true, and people won't like it, but I think it's true. I said the incarnation means that all truth is relative. People are not going to like that, but it's truth. If truth is a person, if truth is personal, and we're talking about space versus left-brain linearity, it means that all truth is relative based on the context, on the space, on the medium. And this is why, like, it's another thing that a saying that I came across that I put as a tweet the other day that was something like, not all roads lead to truth, but truth will find you on all roads. It's another way of saying the same thing. But there's like a lot of people who are gonna hate that. There's a lot of self-identifying Christians who would hate that. And I think it's a natural ramification. I mean, it's an obvious ramification of the incarnation, and Christians will hate it. Funny, that I don't know. That's just super interesting to me. Let's see, what are we talking about? So my boy Jeff said something way back toward the beginning. So this is true. So people get to choose from the options available to them. Valid questions is what makes options available to a person, and also what makes one option more salient than another to a person. So yeah, I mean, you can only ask the questions you can think of. And where do thoughts come from? I don't know. We don't know. And so Jeff, you said she just said the question itself changes based on who is asking. Yes, I think that's true. And so what she's essentially saying, though, so she doesn't understand, though, that the kind of science that she's advocating, because she said, well, what are the things she keeps saying? I need to just write it the hell down. Because she just said science is this thing, the best thing that we have, broken and faulty and whatever as it is, that no matter who's asking the thing, you get the same results, right? But that's only so much as the question is the same, I guess. And if the question is conceived in the same way, and the question is understood in the same way. But then Jordan goes on. Jordan is brilliant because he didn't just go after that, and say that's wrong like I would do. He just went and talked about creative and said creatives will ask different questions that will fundamentally change science that gets you out of the brick in the wall science, or the brick in the wall thinking. Okay, so then I want to bring in center and fringe, I guess, as I'm looking at these comments, because this reminded me of this. And so this also gets out of the binary of like, ooh, really open creatives good and brick in the wall people bad. Again, that's not what I'm saying. The brick in the wall people are going to be the center of a body, of a community, of a culture, because that is what has been integrated and is used and is operable and is creating. It's doing the work that is making the culture exist. It's building the roads, it's building the houses, it's doing all these things. So this is what we do. But then the fringe, again, are going to be the highly creative people that are not really interested in doing this stuff at all, in just like the building of the stuff that everybody knows and understands and is just doing because it's boring. Like, it's boring to them. They have no interest in it. Their interest is way out here in the weird fringe stuff. And so, but in any healthy culture, you need both of those things. So I tweeted a long time ago in my first Twitter foray, like 10 years ago, that and I mean this in probably like a Jordan Haidt sense, but I said the conservative impulse is to deny and exclude the fringe, and the progressivist or liberal or leftist, whatever impulse, is to want to normalize the fringe. And I'm using this in modern categories because I don't know that that's true in modern things, but like you can't. I was saying this to another friend recently who I think started following my channel. I don't know if they're here, but if you're here, you can comment and break the fourth wall. But who has someone in their life who recently converted to Orthodoxy and said something like, I only want to talk to Orthodox people. I don't want to talk to like Muslims or Jews anymore, or anyone else. And I'm like, wow, that sounds intense, because that's what that is, right? That is wanting to exclude and deny the fringe. But if you exclude and deny the fringe, like if you're like Orthodoxy is the truth, but I want to exclude and deny the fringe, people who think differently, Jews, Muslims, liberals, whatever, fill in the blank. You're going to ossify and kill your body, and you're never going to see. You're going to exclude the highly creative people that are challenging your idolatry. That's that Nikolai Berdyaev quote. And in your pursuit of fidelity to Christ, you're going to become antichrist. And so that's that dynamic right there. That's why this little corner of the internet is so interesting and so awesome, is because we should not, and I think that we don't, deny and exclude the fringe, although mediums naturally do that to differing ways. But anyhow, David, what's up? I'm going to keep looking at comments. How are you, my friend?
Yeah, keep tweeting. I'm doing good. I was really interested in what you're saying, and I was wondering, I'm tying it to memory, that thought like there's a couple of places where it will say, and then God remembered the Israelites, he remembered Noah. But what it really means is that's what he's focusing on. And I'm kind of obsessed with this idea, especially as like someone who practices biblical feasts. God will command them to remember. You just go commanded to remember. It's like, yeah, you do these practices, and that I'm obsessed with the meaning of the word, like members of a body. That to remember is to bring the pieces together. So to remember is God actually commanding, or even just God doing the action himself when he remembers the children of Israel or Noah or whatever, that he's like that whole idea that Pajot talks about how anything, an idea is an infinite number of ideas. And to bring all those pieces together, right? Like when he talks about bringing together the idea of a chair, right? That even to think about, to do any action is to remember. Is to say, I'm bringing this set of pieces together and not this set of pieces.
Remembering
that's
its
part of
unity of multiplicity.
That's right. Because right in there, the members is the multiplicity.
Yes.
And so to bring those pieces together is that process. And so then therefore that must also be what the scientific method is you're saying this set of multiplicity I'm joining together.
Yes. And
that's what the theory is, that all these things are connected.
Okay. No, wait. I'm not sure that I'm following you. All these things, what things? Like in science.
When you're making if you're making a prediction.
Yeah.
Because in some situations it's just like, well, that thing that happens after is not just a byproduct. It actually is required. It is a direct reaction from what we're doing, right? My wife and I are right now watching the show House, and he'll be trying to diagnose someone who's sick, and then there'll be one symptom that they'll say, oh, no, that's unrelated. That's just how we found out. And then it turns out that is a direct, they said, oh, this thing that we were neglecting, we thought it was unrelated. It turns out that this is the whole reason why things were happening. Or something that they thought was a cause was actually an effect.
Right.
That kind.
And what's crazy about all that house illustration, I just want to make this point too, because, and then I want to hear Alex, what you have to say is, it's like what Peterson was talking about when he was saying highly creative people make these giant leaps and make these connections.
Right.
Because if the truth is that all things are really connected, like the most creative people are going to make connections between things that seem not only like out there, but like completely irrational.
Yeah.
That's why like highly creative people and like somebody like a schizophrenic or something are like, the lines between genius and psychosis are really close, because they're seeing connections that are and a lot of those things are wrong, or are not even wrong. Let's just say unhelpful. They're almost so distant as to be unimportant, because here's the thing. The connection is so distant. It doesn't mean that it's untrue, but it's impossible to be embodied at this current level. Let's say it that way. So then it's irrelevant. Like you're maybe seeing something that's valid in some way, because I think everything is connected, but it's impossible to be lived. And Rilke, the point is to live everything. So like that's maybe fine, but like that probably isn't what you should focus on right now.
Yeah, no, I very much agree. And I'm experiencing that because I love Jewish literature, and in things like the Midrash, they'll connect like nothing is disconnected, right? So and some of the connections you just go, how the hell did this even become a legend, right? So the ram which is sacrificed instead of Isaac, his entrails, they believe, are the strings that David used on his harp. Like David's lyre has the entrails of the ram that was sacrificed instead of Isaac. You just go, what? Like every
I like it.
And the sound of the trumpet that was heard on Sinai, that was one of those ram's horns. It was being blown.
Beautiful. And that's like
It's
those kinds of
incredible,
things feel
but
to like the rational modern scientific mind. They'll
Yeah.
hear something like that and they'll be like, "That's ridiculous. That makes no."
Wars does it, because in Star Wars, like every single character has a backstory and they're all related, and you're just like, stop it, stop.
Too much.
Sorry, Alex.
Okay,
what was
Alex.
that?
Yeah.
So I like what you guys are saying, and so this is my opinion, so I'll say that first. That the reason why people fear the fringe or different opinions, even if it's a somewhat popular opinion, just but coming from a different perspective. And again, I have to emphasize this is my opinion. In my opinion, the reason why people fear that is because every conversation you have, it doesn't matter who it is with,
Mm-hmm.
has the potential for something.
Yeah.
Those ideas, that whatever it is that they're saying, their experience, their perception has a potential for something. And that's what people fear, that it might bring about change, or worse yet, that it might trigger how can I say this in the best non-threatening type of framing, to imply that you might be wrong, to imply that that your concept, or that you might be going about it the wrong way, or it implies that you might be making a mistake. That's one of the biggest fear that people have, whether they know it or not, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I've come to find that out the hard way. I already have gray hair, my mustache and beard, so I mean, there's some hard lessons I had to learn, and it wasn't by advice. I didn't learn by advice. I learned by hitting my foot, by falling flat on my face many of times. But I think that, in my opinion, that's why people dislike hearing conversations from the other side, or from the fringe, or from whatnot, because of the potential that those ideas have.
Yeah, what if they're right? It somehow, but
Yeah.
I completely agree with you, but that's where Cassie was just doing a talk on identity that I haven't fully related to. But that, because when I was saying earlier that what Jordan Peterson is saying, because it'd be the death of ideological possession, what you're talking about is somebody has an identity that's associated with an idea, and they have a fear that if this person I disagree with is right, it questions that identity. That's
Right.
not you, though. You're
But
equating that idea and your identity, but that's
True.
not who you are.
True.
And humility. This
Have
is
you
why
ever-
humility is so important.
But
Humility is the
everybody's
ability
not
to see
ready,
that.
right? It's about not everybody's ready, and not everybody's ready for so I hate to bring this like as an explanation to what I'm saying. Is what you're saying is true. I don't want to disagree.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is not everybody's ready for the what if I'm wrong? Well, what
I
if my
agree with that.
philosophy is off a bit?
Yeah.
There's an idea that I heard on the TLC. It may be on this stream or somebody else's stream, but about this very touchy subject, because everybody has a different perspective, which is the end of times, right? End times. This generation will not pass away until all this is fulfilled. And some people say, well, that's a metaphor. It's a fractal. It keeps repeating. It's like it's like a rhyming poem. It just keeps maybe not the same, but similar. And it's true in a way that every generation, every culture, every family, every corporation, it kind of, they do go bankrupt. They do end, right? The temple of Jerusalem was destroyed. That whole, whatever it was, that immense history, and it was a physical metaphor, and it was destroyed. So when it comes to the end of something, the end of times as a metaphor, it keeps coming up again and again and again in some way, shape, or form, and people fear it the most. And their personality, it's not any different for people to fear, like, if I go down this way, my whole identity is going to be shattered, or I'm going to have to we fear that.
Yeah,
We fear that to
that's
the core.
part of what you were saying before, and linked with that. I think that there's certain things, as much as Luke, I get what you're saying with everything being connected, but not everything is identical. There still is a multiplicity.
Yeah.
And so it's like, this is the metaphor that came to me when you're cooking and you're making a dish that you've made a bunch of times, but you're missing one ingredient. And it's just like, is this still the same thing? And sometimes it is. And it's just like, it doesn't matter that we don't have this. It's fine. It's fine without it. We just move forward. We didn't have onion, but we had garlic. It still has a little bit of that flavor. It's fine. Right. Whereas other times, my mom made a recipe, but didn't have beans. And she made this dish, which is called pasta fazool. And my dad speaks Italian. And my dad said, "What is this?" And my mom said, "Pasta fazool." And my dad said, "No, it's not. Because that means pasta with beans. So if you take the beans out, I'll still eat it, but it is not the same thing anymore."
Yeah.
Right? In the same way, people thought we can remember what it means like to be the West without Christianity. No, you can't. You think if you remove the beans, it is no longer pasta fazool. And if you remove Christianity, the West is not the same thing. It's a very, very different thing. There's elements, because Alex is talking about people panicked about change. That's why people are panicked about change, right? There's things that you allow in because you say this is harmless. And it's just like, it's not harmless. It'll destroy everything. Right? It's
well, and that's where I think, to that point, I think there's it's why it's helpful to think, instead of like a zero-sum binary, it's helpful to think of things in terms of center and fringe. Like, just because these highly creative people that are seeing connections are right about some of those things, it doesn't mean that you normalize that and make that the center of your society or your culture.
right.
And you also don't, because I mean, that essentially gets into the problem of intersectionality. I was saying that to my friend. I'd never finished this thought, but it's like, you don't want to deny and exclude the fringe, because the fringe is going to give you insights that will revolutionize and change society in ways that are necessary and good. But you also don't want to normalize them, because you can't normalize the fringe. If you normalize the fringe, it becomes the center. And if you normalize all of the fringe, that's intersectionality. That's why you can't do that, because which metric, which point is normal? Well, they can't all be normal.
Well, yes. Yeah. And one of my favorite plays is called The Last Days of Judas Iscariot. And the very end, it takes place in purgatory, and the case of Judas is being reconsidered as to whether or not he gets into heaven. The play has a like C.S. Lewis perspective, that the people in hell are constantly being asked to come up to heaven and are refusing. And so the very end of the play, it's this guy just talking to Judas, and Judas isn't saying anything. And it's this guy who was a professor, and he's just reviewing his life, and he realizes that he's dead. This guy, and it's a story about how he was in love with this girl. He has this incredible story with her, and then he has an affair on his wife, and about how his wife was exactly the same the day that, like, he comes home after this thing happened, and he looked at her and she hadn't changed, but because he let this thing in, he now couldn't deal with her the same way. Right. And there's all these stories. Macbeth is this way, where someone makes a decision, they let something in, and they think they'll be the same. I can still keep all of these things exactly the same if I also let this thing in. And it's no, it'll utterly destroy you in your life and everything else. You don't get to still be the Luke Thompson who has a happy relationship with his wife and with his family and all. You don't get all those things and a mistress. You can't just add it on, right? There's things that can't be integrated from the fringe. It will destroy you.
Okay, I'll tell her we can't. Yosef, he says normal is in the eye of the beholder. He knows what'll get me. Yosef, you sneaky, sneaky guy. The identity or name of that which you wish to preserve as normative, defining what is normal. Okay, but what matters more than the individuals within it survive, or that the name as a collective does? Well, I mean, that's kind of like, what is that? What's that verse in the New Testament, right? It's better that one man die for the sake of the whole, right? Isn't that, what is that verse? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. It's from Gamliel. You said it. You just said it.
Okay.
But that is, again, going back to what we were saying about memory. That is what memory is. To hold the ideas together, to say this goes together, that doesn't. That is unrelated. We're purposely forget that. That's part of it too, is that there's commands to forget things, just like there's commands to remember things.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'm gonna go take a potty break. Jess,
potty break.
What's up, David? In and just
Hi, Jess.
You guys hold it down.
What did you come to say, Jess?
I don't know. I was thinking of this thing. It's been kind of a just an idea I've been toying with, which is sort of the faithfulness of God to reality. And I kind of think about it, with the multiple universes theory, or like the fractal, like there's maybe an infinite number of universes going on of all different possibilities happening. What's that called? There's a name for it.
The multiverse.
It's more than the multiverse. It's like I don't know. We'll call it the multiverse. Maybe that is right. So there's a multiverse going on, and we're just happen to be in this, or you're aware of this one state, but there's every other possible state. And I think that's akin to the, and all the multiverses are equally real, and nothing is so like you get into this weird thing where all possibilities are actually real, and then the actualized possibilities that you have are like somehow, real, but they're not real in the sense that they're unique. It's just happens to be, you're just conscious of this one thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think this is like some sort of weird. I think this destroys the creation. I don't think that's right. I don't think it's possible. Like, and I think of it in terms of the faithfulness of God towards reality. Like he's faithful towards what is real, not towards like the infinite number of possibilities of different universes that could exist. So like I'll talk about it in terms of like temptation, even though that's not theologically right or whatever, but like God could be tempted to, from the fringe, actualize any of these other number of universes that could possibly be possible within his imagination, because he's infinite. He can, anything could be possible.
That to me is, again, memory, because when God acts,
right,
because it's only the ones that he actually has a relationship with, not the ones that are hypothetical in his head, the ones that he actually has a relationship with.
And that's what I wanted to tie it to. I think that has to do with memory, and it has to, and memory has to do with what is real, and so, but it gets into this strange area where memory isn't just the recalling of something past, but it's also the bringing together something towards an end.
Yeah,
And
there's a line in Job which is so bizarre, but I think is related to this, because when I read it, I was just so obsessed because of how bizarre the reference is. It's not the brontosaurus. It's it's the bit about the ostrich, because the bit about the ostrich is really about what, because I think Job is essentially saying you're not even involved as a parent. And then he goes, well, what about the ostrich? How does the ostrich parent? Right? How does the ostrich take care of? So this is the verse. The wings of the ostrich wave proudly, but are they the pinions and plumage of love? For she leaves her eggs to the earth and lets them be warmed on the ground, forgetting that a foot may crush them and that the wild beasts may trample them. She deals cruelly with her young, as if they were not hers. Though her labor be in vain, yet she has no fear, because God has made her forget wisdom and given her no share in understanding. When she rouses herself to flee, she laughs at the horse and the rider. This is one of the bits, I don't know why it always hits me, in the middle of talking about like God's justice and whether or not things are right. God just goes, you know, ostriches, they just lay their eggs on the ground. Like they don't even care, but they can outrun a horse if you think about it.
it's also the one place where God refers to himself in the third person. He says her maker did not give her wisdom. You're like, that was you. You're the maker. Like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
David Joseph and I have talked about this a lot. Joseph has a lot of opinions about how the ostrich gets translated. But I think it's such a, sometimes I don't know how to take that, because Job's children died, and here's God saying like, oh, here's the ostrich that just leaves its eggs on the ground. It could be crushed, and sort of praising the ostrich for its lack of fear and also its stupidity, and then also because it can run.
Still continues. We have ostriches. So this idea that this is the level, like God, a loving parent, a parent which succeeds must act in this way, cannot act in a different way. Consider the ostrich, still doing fine, right? I think there might be something in there. There is a level of attention which is required in order for someone to be a parent. Like what you were saying with the multiverse. God doesn't interact with the multiverse, he interacts with this one.
Yeah, and well, it's interesting because, like, I mean, if we there's something of the ostrich has faith in her eggs, something like that. Like it's
right.
Like it appears careless, but it's actually not. And like, because the ostriches keep continuing, there's some sort of wisdom that of foolishness that the ostrich has.
The earth acts as though it's what birds normally do, for she leaves her eggs on the earth and lets them be warmed by the ground. So the ground is acting the way that a mother bird normally acts with.
With eggs, that's good. Right.
Because a hen like keeping her eggs warm, but here it's the earth that's acting as mother. Warming it.
Yeah. And that's like the whole theme of God's speech is nature and the earth and the creation. And here's a bird allowing her eggs to be warmed by the earth. That's great.
Unless I'm mistaken, the word yatsar, which is a pottery term, making of Adam, it's when he forms Adam out of the earth. It's a pottery term. That same term is used related to the animals when God makes them.
Yeah. Well, that's the whole that's the whole underlying theme of all of God's speech. There is one of creation. If we can go back to memory, there. Well, I kind of lost my train of thought. What I do want to return to that, but you guys say something.
I've said too much. I'm going to stop saying. You need to remember what you wanted to say about memory.
I know. Well, Job has a bit about memory in there that's really profound. It has to do with his kids, where he imagines when he's talking with his friends, he's like, if only I were a tree, because if a tree gets cut down and the stump is still in the earth, at the scent of water, it would start to bud. And so he says, there's hope for a tree. And he imagines himself as a tree, that the branches and stuff were his family, his children, and that's been cut down and destroyed. And then he sort of laments after this idea. He says, but it's not that way for man. Man goes down into the dust and is gone into Sheol. And then right after that, he imagines, he says, God, if only you would hide me in Sheol for a time and then remember me. So hide me in Sheol until your anger has passed and then remember me. Job is like, just let's get this over with and bring me up later. But he, up until they don't have like a fully formed idea of resurrection, this early on. And so this is this idea
there's also
of going
sections that say, will the dust remember you? Will the dust praise you? Is there any remembrance of you in Sheol?
Yeah. Yeah, because you're gone and your body disintegrates and turns into dust, and it doesn't. But if God remembers you, then there's a hope that he could. And Job even talks about how like God will, he's angry at me now, but he will have pleasant thoughts towards me at some point, and at that point he can remember me. And then there's this idea of resurrection. But I think that's why at the very end he has the same number of kids, and then so 7 boys and 3 girls again. And it's a sign from God to Job that he remembers the other children. And so if he remembers them, they're not lost.
Right.
Because you're still left with the puzzle at the very end. Like, yeah, this is all well and good, but still like his 10 kids are dead. And then he gets 10 kids more. Like these are supposed to replace him. Like when I was talking to Jordan Hall, he was like, that's kind of adding insult to injury. Like, here's all your stuff back. Here's 10
Depends
more
on the kids.
But even the naming of children, that's very interesting, where so many cultures have, you name someone after a family member. And that's one of the ways that person is never forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
Right? As long as this person's alive, no one's going to forget Uncle Jesse because there's a kid named Jesse, right?
Remember when PBK used to call you Jesse all the time, Jess?
I remember that.
I don't know why I went Jesse. I only after saying Jesse did I remember that you were Jess. Can I read you guys a short poem?
Yeah.
Can I read you a short poem? This is a poem I wrote called The Peach. My father cut down our tree, sliced the stump like he was parting a peach, dug deep in the dirt to make sure it was as dead as death. It had become too sick to bear anything, and the years had not been kind to either branch or leaf. Believe me, I speak only of a tree. The time for rotting had passed for those lifeless roots, but a shoot shot up like a hand from the grave. And though obviously from the corpse of the old tree, a sapling sprang in its place and grows in our backyard to this day.
That's good. It's really good.
I like just saying, believe me, I speak only of a tree. I'm not. I'm lying. Chezi without a mustache.
You know,
I know,
I
clean shaven.
shaving mistake. My wife dating a child, married to a child.
You will be better able to blow the shofar.
Exactly. That's why I did it.
Yeah.
So, two things. One, I'll need your assistance on. Just to what Jess said, and this relates to Sam Tiedemann's recent debate video about what happens in Sheol. So we know from the Witch of Endor, right, that Samuel and Saul, they meet each other and he brings them out from somewhere. So clearly there's memory over there. And clearly she brings up the man with the coat. He knows, why'd you bring me up? So, you know, is the soul there? Is it consciousness? Is it memory? So I don't know if it's as clear as, like, you know, once I'm in Sheol, it's done, right? I think we've moved past the resurrection being like, I come back with the same Air Jordans I have on and like everything's like great, right? We don't really look at it that way. I would probably be more like, we're going through an experience right now that we are, you know, uploading all this experience in the consciousness cloud. Ideally, those who are orient themselves properly and make sure that they have ample storage in resurrection, or being aware, or being consciously aware of that elevated state of consciousness is the reality we experience, right? Or we say the righteous are bathing in the radiance of God's light, right? So which, you know, starts like stemming from their head in a certain sense. So I don't know if Sheol means the end game. It just means like a different reality. The thing I need your help on, and I commented on the chat, was there is an interpretation where God creates, when we're talking about that there was evening and there was day during the creation period, there's readings of interpreting the words over there saying that there's a period where God is creating worlds and destroying them. And that's sort of like a superposition where at some point God said, like, this one that I built is the one I like. We could also look at it as, you know, things are here and not there until we observe them and we're paying attention to them, and then they exist, right? So it's sort of the story of what I tell my kids, at least, Adam and Eve. Are Adam and Eve the first humans that existed, or is at that point the story becomes relevant, right? When consciousness kicks in, that's when I have to tell you a story. Were there bonobos beforehand? Yeah, but that's, who cares? Like, that's not part of the story. So God says, or the sages say, were there other worlds? Are there other multiverses? It's a two-part comment.
Mm-hmm.
I would say
that relates to.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead. I think the point was clear.
I think that relates to what people used to refer to as the apple of your eye, which even appears in Hebrew scripture, where that's the center of your eye. That means it's the thing you're paying attention to. When God, like, it's also a delicate bit, right? Something you act gently with. You don't poke yourself in the eye. But the idea of Israel is the apple of my eye, it's Israel is the focus, right? There's a notion that he almost disinherits the nations and is going to focus on Israel. And then I think this is very important as Christians, because we believe that essentially through that process, it was God extending to the rest, right? That the rest get brought in as well. But there's an idea that there's a period of time which God is not remembering the rest of us. We get brought back
grafting and cutting off, and grafting and cutting off.
That's right. But for the very long time, God, I believe, was not focusing on the Goy. We're not focusing on the nations.
So, I mean, we're getting close to the Day of Atonement, right? Where we read the whole story of Jonah, which is focused to the outside, right? That whole story has nothing to do with the Jews. That is a story that's completely focused on themselves. And I would say not remembering with regards to God is obviously a problematic thing to say, but I would say less focused. Let's think about the creation, right? God says, and it was good. Obviously it was good. God created it. But even here we see that God is so almost like taking a step back and be like, do I like this? Yes, I like this. This is good. And sort of like also beauty is in the eye of the beholder in a certain sense. Like God himself is testing out due to the retraction, there's a tension there, right? So I want to see if this creation I built is actually worthy of my attention. Now, I would say the Gentiles, through this process, as Israel transgresses, more focus can be put on to the Gentiles. And as the Gentiles themselves, and I would say from like Jesus onwards, as they start bringing in the unity of God, understanding God, removing of pagans, this starts making them a lot more noticeable in God's eyes. And that goes all the way back to, like we say about...
Well, and same thing with Jonah. You said it has nothing to do with the Jews. The Jews is how salvation comes to them. Like outside of Jonah, who's the one who saves them all. So it's not outside of the peer review, because God's promise is that salvation comes from Israel. So salvation must come from Israel in that story. It doesn't come from a prophet of Dagon who goes, you know what? Like it comes from a believer in Hashem.
I'm thinking about what you just said. I'm also being distracted by some posts that I'm wondering if I should comment about or not.
No, don't know. I didn't pull that one up on purpose. We don't be distracted by those things. Look at this special treat.
Hello. We should really say there's a blessing.
Hi, Lance.
Say God resurrects the dead if you haven't seen someone for a month. But it's been even longer than that, Lance. So blessed be thee, resurrects the dead. You're back with us, friend.
I will highlight this comment. Oh, never mind. I will forget that. I will forget that comment. It no longer exists in my reality. That's that world that I created. I now have discreated. I have cut it off. I will potentially regraft it in later. What up, Lance?
Tell us your story, Lance. Where have you been?
I don't want to sidetrack. Keep on this conversation. This is great. So,
okay.
No, some people reached out to me and were asking for proof of life this week. So I figured I would show up and say I'm alive. So no, just been crushed at work, 15-hour days, and we just got through our audit, and I have some new folks, and so it's just been a lot. And my wife just had hip replacement surgery, so it's just had a lot going on. And sometimes real life takes over, and you just gotta focus where your feet are at. So, but I am, I love it. Luke, Jess, you guys have been crushing it lately. Just loving it. You guys are doing it. I mean, Jess is on a roll, man. He has got some great stuff. His hiddenness of God thing that he was talking about with Job, and
I interpret everything Jess says as more dramatic because he's in black and white.
Yeah.
Very artistic, really creates a mood.
Jess, you should have a intro to your channel of like Big Pun, like you're not a player, you just crush a lot.
At any rate, carry on. This conversation's great. I'll just be in the background. Keep rolling with it. I love it.
Yeah, memory is... David, what did you just say? I don't want to go away from what you just said and Kezi was thinking about. Say it again. I was distracted by comments.
Can I try to reiterate what you said? And
even better.
It seems like you're talking about, there's sort of this pattern of like, there's this expansion. So it's like the growth of a tree. Then on the tree, there's a fruit with a seed in it. And eventually that falls into the earth. This tree dies. Then this thing springs up again. It seems to be this is the pattern. So it's like the tree after it grows ends up dying. But there's always the hope if you have a seed. And so Noah, the remnant, this kind of thing, and even the Jewish people being the focus. Oh, what's up, Alan? And then that being the hope for the nations. This has always kind of puzzled me because like when Sherry and I are going through the book of Job, we always use seed analogies or whatever, but there's no seed analogies in Job. And I'm like, obviously they knew about seeds and like how it would be like correspond with the story. Like, why isn't it in there at all? And well, I mean, what I just said about the tree, the sprout, and then the memory of God is about as close as that's where Job goes instead of a seed metaphor. It is this, it's not just because the children are seeds, really. And I guess the seeds have been destroyed. So what's the hope?
Yes.
And so the hope is actually in the memory of God rather than the seed.
Oh my God. Okay, so
Wait. Yes, I went. Sorry, for a second, David. Expand on.
Go ahead.
The hope. The hope is memory of God. Just because I think we're really there. Like you just said, the kids with their sacrifice, right? Like the seed is dead. That's just Ouroboros. It's not moving on.
Right.
Job was feeling that tension, right? So can you dig a little deeper? Just say better.
I'm
sorry that I'm pushing you. You're there.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's a famine metaphor. It's when the seed that you've gathered for the future is gone, and then you have no hope going forward. And so what do you do? Like you're completely out of it. You have no control. You have nothing. So God has to provide for you somehow. And I mean, that's what's coming to mind. It's a famine. It's a complete disaster. And so how do you get through that? And then the other question is why would God allow it? And it seems to be a renewal. It's a renewal process that has to take place, but it's very like Sherry was saying in the comments, like you maybe you don't want to be the apple of God's eye because you become a part of his renewal process and you become more like him. And he is a God who pours himself out and to serve his creation. And so when he, the question is, what is a righteous man for? Here's Job, a righteous man. The righteous man is to be poured out.
And righteous under how much scrutiny? Like that idea of being the apple of God's eye. I had a university course where there were 5 people in the whole course. So you did not have the option of not doing your work. All of us were the apple of the teacher's eye. So there was no opportunity to not do your work. If you did, you had to stand in front of this person and be unable to engage in class.
Yeah. So I just want to jump in quickly because I don't have a ton of time. But one, the word, right, is not apple, it's pupil, which is important. Right. And one doesn't see one's pupil. I think this is a really important distinction, right? You see through your pupil. Really pupil here, it probably means like the whole lens, aperture, pupil, like of the eye, not just the pupil, but the middle part, right?
Right.
And it is if you actually look at how it's used, both in Jewish liturgy and also in the Bible, right? It's more that it's the lens, and this gets into some Vervaeke stuff, right? Like if I concentrate on the lens of my glasses, I don't actually see the things on the other side of the lens that the lens is supposed to be helping me see. Like it's a meta perspective, but it's also like not the proper way to use the glass in a sense. Like so on one level, like you want to protect your glasses, or your eyes, whatever. You don't want them to break. You don't want to poke them. You don't want to scratch them. On the other hand, like they're actually not there for attention to be put on them. This gets into pouring out, right? Like, and I think this is like, I think a really important distinction that helps kind of reframe, forgive the pun, what's going on here, right? Because, so I know Sherry left and she said maybe we should talk about this sometime. I agree. I mean, I totally agree, Jess, with you, with Sherry. Like maybe you don't want. I get that there would be an aversion to maybe being at God's center of attention, and essentially like having an in-depth, really vulnerable, relationship with anybody, right, is hard. And like, and part of forgetting, and like, it's sometimes like sometimes it's okay to be forgotten, to be in the back of the class, to not be noticed. Like sometimes you don't want that, right? Sometimes you don't want that attention. And this gets into the whole memory thing. Do we want to be remembered, and how do we want to be remembered, and the dangers of being in that relationship? Because it requires such a level, I would say, of mindfulness, of presence, of embodiment, of that, like, we just are afraid of, right? Like, this is the people not wanting to hear God's voice on Sinai and asking for, Moses to do it, or wearing a mask, or the veils, right? Like, this is all of that stuff that, and Christians can say, now the veil is torn, but honestly, I think, humanity's psychology hasn't changed, including Christian psychology, I would suggest, right? There is still, being at the center of God's attention, and that there's also an entire argument about how that is the definition of holiness. Holiness is the structure of God's attention. Like that, like, not, is all of humanity ready for that? Is that something everyone wants? No. Is that something that we shall aspire to, even, as a question? And on top of that, like, if you think about this pupil lens eye metaphor, there is a point, perhaps, where the righteous, are so self-empty that the attention of God goes through them as opposed to on them, which might be the ideal kind of balance between these things, right? Because, they're God's tool, but at the same time, like, God is using them, seeing through them, bringing salvation through them, however, mediating through them, and they can survive in a way, but only essentially by, right? It's also like, it's basically by emptying themselves, by being kenotic, can they survive God's attention, and let his attention pass through them without destroying them.
Two
That's
questions.
really good, man. That's really good.
Joseph, one is emptying yourself. I'm using Moses as an example. Is God is speaking through his throat, or through Moses, as we say? Is that because he's fully nullifies himself? There's nothing there, so God could go through him, or is he fully balanced and comfortable with his ego, and that's why he could speak in the name of God? I'm saying, is it fully embodying the image, or is emptying yourself so the image could go through? And secondly, just with regards to, you're talking about like remembrance over here, like how much remembering someone, like, because as you know, Yosef, we say that if you mention someone, well, not even someone's name, but if you mention a teaching from another sage or someone else, that rabbi, his lips are moving in the grave, right? And in a certain sense, that's how some of our rabbis refer to resurrection, right? Is like remembering someone. So just if you could intertwine those.
When we think about the resurrection teaching one, I think the other one's much easier in some sense for Moses. I mean, it's the harder one, but it's also the one that I think, because it's harder, it has more attention on it, and therefore people have talked about it, and I can think of connections for it, right? So insofar, right, what's different, I think, about a lens, or the eye, right, is for it to be its fullest self, having a sense of self, essentially makes it the clearest, right? It becomes the glass to see God clearly through, or whatever, aspa Clara hameira, which is Moshe, right? Moshe is, that's what we use that for Moshe's vision, right? Right, that he sees God clearly through the glass, whereas everyone else sees it through a darkened glass, like, which Christians will recognize. That is a Jewish, phrase from the Midrash on Moses's revelation compared to everyone else's. And right, he becomes, in a sense, he becomes the clear and functional lens that he is, because he has a true sense of self, which is not nullified. But it's precisely the balance, right, of, by being his whole self, he becomes exactly what he needs to be this mediator, which is empty enough such that he can fulfill his function.
I'm wondering, this might tie back to what Jess was saying before. There's the notion of a seed, but there's also an idea of grafting, which in the ancient world, you'd have on your property, for instance, like a wild tree that had a huge root system. And so you'd take a something that you'd want to have access to all of those roots, you would graft a branch onto like of a preferred, let's say, olives, right? A better kind of olives, you'd graft that on to have access to the full set of roots, of an idea which you guys are kind of talking about the person who is dead in and of themselves, but become grafted to something with a better root system, if you will. That the power is not in themselves, but attached to something more.
I don't know that I want to go down this alley. One, there's more than just those two techniques, right? There's also burying branches that can reroot in the ground elsewhere, right? There's a whole bunch of techniques for bringing life and new root systems to trees. The Mishnah has a list of 6 different ways, because they have to legalistically, right? We have to talk about do you bring first fruits from a grafted tree, or from a tree that that has first fruits, but you've reburied and it has a new root system? Is that a new tree, or is it the original tree? Right? They have to give all these questions. So I mean, we have lots and lots of metaphors from ancient agriculture, and I'm hesitant to go down certain ones, especially grafting is complicated because of the rules against hybridization. Right? There's very strict rules about that. And this gets into center and fringe, and what can be hybridized with what, or grown with what, or sowed with what. Right? And I mean, we can take this in a million different directions.
My brother has an unholy tree that's 5 different kinds of stone fruit growing off of the same tree.
Right.
It's
So that would be not something a Jew could do.
Yeah.
For instance. Right. So there's some interesting possible lenses to see that through that might be complicating it. So anyway, I got to go, but this was fun. By the way, Luke, sorry, one other thing. So I've been, for professional reasons, looking into resilience engineering, which is kind of, it's from systems engineering, but system can be anything. It could be a person, it could be an organization, it could be all of humanity, the environment, whatever. There's basically 5 fundamental, this is a fairly newish field, but it came out of some pretty rigorous stuff. But essentially, there's 5 fundamental trade-offs, one of which is essentially center-fringe, though they don't call it that. They call it, and it's actually, I know 3 different words for that trade-off, and I wonder if the words we use shape how we think about this. I mean, I'm sure they do. But so they call it, what do they call it? Reflective versus reactive, I think. So things that are doing things into the world versus reflecting on itself and being self-concentrated. But in machine learning, we call that exploration versus exploitation, whether I'm looking at new things or just exploiting what I already have, which is kind of a weird commodified way to think about it. But I mean, all of them, I think, have language biases, all 3 of these framings. There's 4 other fundamental trade-offs, and all 5 trade-offs interact with each other, right? So none of them are independent. They're all interconnected. And if you make one set of trade-offs, you automatically affect the other 4. So the other ones are, I'm trying to remember, but one is short-term versus long-term. One is if you concentrate things versus diffuse them. I'm trying to come up with a concentrated solution versus diffuse. I'm trying to remember I don't remember the other 2 are off the top of my head. But anyway, I think the point of what resilience engineering is, though, I think this is to get to the bigger question, is essentially it describes what it takes for things to be what are the fundamental principles of sustaining something over time. Anything, any system, any group, any individual, any human body biologically, right, over time. So it's one of 5 trade-offs, and I do wonder, I know you were very concentrated on this one. I do wonder if it's not worth bringing some of the other trade-offs into the conversation and see how this trade-off's dependent on these other ones, especially along the lines. There's some other really good stuff from resilience engineering that you guys have brought up, kind of under different names here. So one is the principle of, I can't remember, fluent perspective. So basically, if I'm inside something, I know how hard it is to get everything to work. But from an outside perspective, it looks much easier, right? I just this is the obvious cause and effect. This is the inside, but I don't understand all the little trade-offs that the person inside the box had to make for this whole system to work. And there's this, I think this is something especially interacts with center-fringe, especially that framing of whatever you want to call that trade-off, the center-fringe, right? Because the center's looking at the fringe and doesn't understand what happens at the fringe in order for it to work, and makes it and oversimplifies it, and the fringe does the same thing to the center, right? So they're both kind of outside perspectives on each other that can constantly kind of get each other wrong. But in doing so, by getting each other wrong, they can actually stimulate each other in certain ways, which is kind of interesting, right? It's none of it is in a vacuum. And like if I get you wrong and then I react to you in a certain way, then you are going to take that reaction and probably misunderstand the reaction and then re-react to it, and that's going to just continue forever, right? But that's not a bad thing. I mean, that's how systems evolve, and eventually, in theory, like on the one hand, you might say things might come together better and become more consistent and coherent. But on the other hand, like all that happens is that there's new problems that come up and new perspectives that I exclude because my new center has, new fringe, my old fringe is part of it. And it never is never ending. That's fine. It's like, that's living into the question, right? That this is the whole, like, and this is my point about, do we trade the collective for the collective, like identity versus like the individual, like a personalist, thing. Like, do we care about the person sustaining and surviving and adapting over time, or are we trying to preserve, for better or worse, like just like the identity of something, just because we have nostalgia toward it, sentimentality toward it? Like, is that collective worth something more? And this gets right into what Jess is saying: memory being not just about the past, but also about something like pulling us towards something, or the normative aspect of memory, that we're making choices about what we remember and how we talk about it. Anyway.
Yeah, no, that's good. I would love to talk to you more about all the different engineering aspects of it. I don't think it's a matter of, like, I'm not trying to argue for privileging one versus the other, or like in the comments it talks about I hate subjective objective distinctions. Like, it's just such a wrong way of thinking about things, I think. And even center and fringe, the point of like center-fringe stuff is that it's part of a cohesive whole. And which one do you prioritize? Well, you probably prioritize the center, except when the center no longer holds. Like when the reality of the center is that it no longer holds. It's like this quote of like, in times of change, learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists. Yeah. So like, then if you're not prioritizing the fringe, the creative, the person that sees the shift before everybody else does, it's flood, it's chaos.
Well, one of the major points in resilience is there's no perfect balance. It's not like you're going to always say, I want 70% center and 30% fringe. Like, part of resilience is the trade-off between flexibility and rigidity, right? Like, how much am I trying to hold on to versus how much am I, and that will change over time depending on your situation. Or you has to. Right? You have to be adaptable, and how quickly you can change. I mean, that in some ways that's the definition of resilience. Resilience is basically defined as how well can I change to new things that I didn't anticipate.
Isn't that, like, could you frame it as just proper relationship with the world?
Yes,
proper relationship to your environment.
I would say proper, but not in the sense of perfectly fitted, because there's no such. Right, I'd say proper because it's like perfectly fitted, not just to the past and what it is now, but potentially for the future. But there's no such thing as perfectly fitted, right? Like, so proper, I think proper can kind of get us stuck in an idealized or perfect state, which, right? So, but it is like something that's well coupled or well anticipating of its environment. Well, all right, like that, I think is probably better. But it has to it's totally about age and arena, right? It's totally about, and that is, thinking about like the definition of relevance, that Vervaeke uses, and meaning, and like those things as being characterizing like the age and arena relationship. I think that they all tie together, just from different perspectives. Right? Anyway, I do really have to go. Oh, and now we'll cut to go.
That is one of the perspectives of.
Thanks for you, Lance.
Yeah. Lance, everyone wants you to talk in the comments if you're watching it. If you're reading the comments, everyone's like, Lance.
No. You guys have been carrying on conversations without me beautifully. I'm just jumping back in.
I want everyone to know Joseph has a new little tiny baby boy.
Yeah, he does.
It's awesome. I kind of wanted to go back to what Hezi was saying, but Hezi took off. I wanted to ask him about, because we were talking about the lens and God looking through, or us seeing through a holy person, a righteous person. And I was thinking about Moses, and when he struck the rock, when he wasn't supposed to, he's supposed to speak to it. He strikes the rock. God still brings water out of it, but then he's not allowed to go into the promised land. I was wanting to hear Hezy's thoughts on that, because I had some thoughts about this with the end of Job too, because I was talking with Chris Green at the Olympia event, and he has a bit about Job in his book, his latest book. And Job, so God speaks, Job responds, then God speaks again, and there's a second response. And in Job's second response, that's the one where he says, I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. And the word there is not necessarily repent. It's comforted. It's some sort of metanoia change. But he's reading it as repent, because there's something really interesting there. In the conversation with the friends, he says, I would love to speak to God, and I want to speak with God, but if he showed up, I would probably even betray myself. I wouldn't be able to stand up in front of him like I would like to, or say the words that I would like to. And the friends are saying to him, repent, repent. And he's like, there's nothing for me to repent of. And then at the very end here, at the culmination of God's speech, Job kind of like falls apart.
Yeah, I will place my hand on my mouth.
Yeah, I repent. And it's it. Well, even the first and second response, the first response, God has to say, like, all right, Job, I want you to say something now. And he said, I don't have anything to say. I'm going to put my hand over my mouth. And then the second response, I was kind of thinking, like, you know, God's ending his speech about Leviathan. So already it's this terrifying vision. And I kind of imagine, like, what if Job is like interrupting God just to get it to stop? Because he's like just overcome. And then Job says, I know that you can do all things. Because it doesn't say that God asked for his response. It just says, Job now says, I know that you can do all things. And then he offers this thing, and then he says, I repent. And so Chris says that Job is kind of like betraying himself. And then this is why God then says to the friends, he's like, this is your fault that he's repenting. This is your bad advice. Now you need to bring a sacrifice, and Job's going to pray for you. And anyway, so there's like a way that like Job kind of falls apart there at the end. And then there's also a way at the end of Moses' service, Moses falls apart, strikes the rock. David's story is the same. Like, David becomes king, and it's Bathsheba, and then his sort of inability to like lead his family well, and then everything falls apart there too. And well, it's just curious, like, because like we're talking about these lenses, seeing God through someone who is righteous and whatever, but there's always this sort of like faltering point that sort of breaks, where they break.
Well, I think this also gets back in the idea of memory. There's a notion of coherence. These are the things that make the thing. And so there's things that if you lose those parts, it's no longer the thing. But also if you add parts, that is no longer the thing. You shall neither subtract nor add to all the words which you have heard. Right? And so there's an idea of when Moses he adds to what God said to do. It's not the same thing if you add the thing. And if it's also not the same thing if you subtract the thing. If you lose some of the parts, you're gonna lose what the thing was.
So how does that correspond to like Moses? Like, how would you?
Yeah, he's commanded by God to do something, and he does something and something else. He adds to it. in order to accomplish what God requested, right? You can think about it as Hagar, right? Is okay, God said this. I think we could get this by adding something else. Hagar being the thing that we're adding, right? That way it'll make more sense, right? There's situations where God says, I'm going to defeat this people. Don't show up with swords. I want you to show up with pottery, torches, and trumpets. You're gonna blow the trumpets, light the torches, and break the pots. That's all you're gonna do in the battle. If you include too many people or you include people with weapons, you'll think you won the battle. But in order for it to be fully me, I need you, like what was said before, to empty, to remove the actions. And that's why it's just as important, not that you forget some, like, obviously there's commandments to do things, but there's also things not to add on top of what you're doing.
That's interesting.
Right? You can even think about that as some of the things that upset Jesus the most, is it's not merely the not doing, but then you're doing your own traditions, but not actually fulfilling the words that God really required of you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thinking of adding and subtracting, it's like in the case of Job, it seems like it was all subtraction in order to took away all his blessings in order to show his internal righteousness, this sort of hidden righteousness that's inside of him. But then it's also the reverse. Like Job has to grapple with the God where there is no blessing. It's only suffering. And and well, it kind of gets like Hezi wrote, God not letting Moses in the promised land is actually out of love, for he knows it's a land of particular commandments, which is not fit for an abstract man of God. Yeah, this gets to like, what's the bigger plan of God? Like, how does he use all things to his purposes? And so to, even framing these things as failures in some sense sort of miss out on, something bigger happening where even the failures play a part. Solomon is a heir, he's in the line of David that where the Messiah is coming from. And like that's crazy, because David and Bathsheba should not have been together at all.
Right.
But here we have the line of David as this thing that's valuable in God's sight, and God uses it.
Right. And I wonder also in Job, this may only be my perspective. I think Leviathan is a reference to the Satan, to the accuser. Leviathan, the dragon at the so I think the beginning of Job, he says, God has done all this to me. But that it wasn't God who did it. It was Hasatan who did it to him. And then he gets a overview of because he's making claims about perfectly understanding the situation. Job and all of his friends are making claims about understanding the situation. So it's very interesting that God shows them things that clearly they don't understand. Do you have any idea how complicated your circulatory system is? Right? It's like doing a tour of all of creation. It's just like, do you make this happen? Do you understand how that happens? Do you understand this? And then the thing he ends at are two creatures which were symbolic of the chaos itself, of the creatures that would be identified with Hasatan, with the twisting serpent, the spiritual realm. So like, I actually think that's not an element of nature. I think in bringing Bahima and Leviathan into it is you're saying, okay, you don't understand all of the world. What about even what's deeper than that? You understand that?
Yeah. Yeah, there. So I think that's a legitimate reading. Like I but like all that poetry in Job, it's like multivalent. So there's multiple meanings at different, depending on how you come to it. Like lately, I've been reading it as God sort of starting to talk about Leviathan. So that's like verses 1 through 11, and then God says in verse 12, I will not keep silence concerning his limbs or his mighty strength or his goodly frame. So God's like, I'm going to continue talking here. But who is he talking about? His strength, his frame. And I think you could say that God is now talking about Job at this point also. So I think so he says, who can strip off his outer garment? Who can come near him with a bridle? So who can bridle Job and his words and the way he shut his friends up? They couldn't get him to stop speaking.
Yeah.
So who can open the doors of his face? Around his teeth are terror. His back is made of rows of shields, shut up closely as with a seal. And you think about the skin disease he had, his skin would have been all flaky. It would have looked like he had scales on. And so I was talking about this with Yosef, and there's even like midrashes about this, about becoming Leviathan. And it's not about becoming necessarily an agent of chaos or destruction. It's about being the type of creature that can live in the sea, in the deep, and live.
Right.
So this is the place that is unlivable, chaotic, or whatever for a man is home to the Leviathan. And so if you become Leviathan, you can live in the chaos. And it's and just like if you keep Job in mind if you read like verses 12 all the way to the end, and like the flashing of the fire in his eyes and the smoke out of his nostrils, like God's describing what had just happened and sort of like glorying in Job's defense and his arguments and the way he's portraying himself. And so like I think I talked about this in my Jordan Hall conversation, but like Moses leads the people across between the sea on dry land. So he makes a spot on dry land. Jonah goes into the deep and is swallowed by Leviathan. Job becomes Leviathan. And then Jesus walks on the water.
Well, and I believe that's the beast and the dragon in Revelation. That's Leviathan. And Leviathan elsewhere is described as being multi-headed. You crush the heads of Leviathan. And then there's the mighty beast as well. So I think that it's again the same image. I don't know if you've because maybe the church is Job in Revelation. So the use of the beast and hello.
Yeah, well, I mean, there is that correspondence between the beast of the land and the beast of the sea. And there's something really strange in all that imagery, because you also have, like, you've heard Peugeot talk about Christ on the cross as taking a serpentine shape, just like the bronze snake on the pole, right? So, and Jesus uses that example. He says, like when Moses lifted up the bronze serpent, I will be lifted up. And there's this weird coming together of the imagery of the snake and the tree and Christ on the cross together. And then, so you also have this strange imagery of the beast of the sea also being, a servant of God, as well as being the personification of what is evil too. And so this gets all into that the Antichrist stuff. Is because like, how can you tell the difference between Christ and Antichrist? And like sometimes like you don't even know because Antichrist is trying to look like Christ.
Egyptians used snake imagery as their angels, and that's one of in Isaiah, seraphim can just mean snake.
Yep.
Right. So it becomes a completely different image where the wings, like the puffs of a cobra's neck, are described as wings and are sometimes described as being far out like that. So the image of the snake, it's even more controversial because that would have been taken by former people in Egypt as an image of Egyptian divine beings, right? So it's the snake as a divine being is also within that section. Which is, again, how is this working? How is it spelt out? What is happening?
Well, and Jess, wasn't it? I've heard it in you. I want to make sure I understand this right. Didn't you talk about like somehow there's this thing in the end, like we're going to use Leviathan skin as tents, and then we're going to eat Leviathan? Like, what is that feast?
It's what's for dinner.
There's a whole midrash about at the end. So there was one Leviathan that was killed at the beginning of creation, and then there's someone's audio is leaking. Then there's another Leviathan killed at the end of history, and then God's going to make a tent out of it where everyone's going to live inside of it, and then we're going to eat its flesh. Basically, we're going to have a big feast. But it's so strange because this is what happens at the end of Job. At least everyone comes into the house of Job. Everyone is gathered into the house of Job, and they eat bread together. And we even have the same thing in Christianity. Everyone comes and becomes a part of the body of Christ, and we eat his flesh and drink his blood. This is the Eucharist. And so go ahead, Alex, you've been hanging out.
So I wanted to incorporate what you guys were saying about the Leviathan and the enemy and being devoured and all that good stuff. And so now I have to begin with, this is my opinion, so I could be off. So as far as there is a context where Christ, and you guys mentioned about him mentioning about the pole and the snake, and if you look at it, right, the story about if you look at it, you're going to survive the snake wound. And so as a metaphor, it's like the attacks of the enemy, if you believe, we don't know how it's going to work, right? So how can poison not affect you? Right? We don't understand physically how that works, but metaphorically, if you believe in the Messiah, even though the enemy bites you, you will survive it. And then Jesus will take it one step further, where he mentioned that he will bind the strong man, right? He gives a metaphor that the thief comes in the night, and then at another metaphor he says that once you bind the strong man, then you can plunder his house. So how did he this monster, this Leviathan, this dragon, this snake, he did it, right? We all know it. He did it at the cross. And from my perspective is that ancient enemy, the adversary, whether he's working with or against, whether he's part of the plan or not, whether it's all working in unison or not, that's for a different conversation. But the way it all began in the garden was with the idea, right? Here comes the snake, and he implants the idea of, hey, right? And that's where the idea first begins in Adam and Eve, where, there's a different truth here. So the snake says or implies, and now mankind has to decide, okay, who do I trust, right? Because I'm hearing another portion of the story, and they went with the snake instead of going with God and asking God, hey, God, can you clarify? That's a metaphor. Because we are confronted every single day, because we all have our fears and our wants and our pleasures and desires, and they all align or don't align within Christianity. And some people are not even Christian, so everybody has their own way of seeing the world and hearing different stories, and we all have to kind of decide in a way, all right, I'm hearing different interpretations of what is best for me, what is not good for me, what I should do, what should I believe. And we all have to, in a way, have to come to that decision of, who do I trust?
Well,
right?
and I'm
'Cause
trying to
there's this
interpret
great
something.
monster.
Yeah,
Sorry, go
I'm
ahead.
trying to figure something out right now related to this that I don't see anyone bringing into the conversation, which is the bronze serpent becomes an idol. That's if
At the
you
end, yeah, that's
continue
right.
in the text, it's not merely a symbol of God's grace, and just like the bronze serpent, the Son of Man will be lifted up. To what extent has Jesus become an idol? It's a real question that I don't see enough people talk about. Sorry.
I think this is what Vervaeke talks about when he talks about the God beyond God.
Right.
You know, like I think the idea of Christ beyond Christ, let's say, is kind of like the things that are outside of your frame. You know, like and like I can totally see myself becoming one of those guys who find myself cut off from grace because Christ is no longer fitting onto the cross that I have built for him. I don't know if that's probably a really horrible thing to say, but I'll shut up now.
Yeah, the thing I've been as you've been talking, all this stuff here is like when we're talking about Leviathan and all this stuff, is I can't just escape with ultimately everything's going to be for the reconciliation of all things, right? Like, so, you know, they can use that. And I think any of us who's, at least through our understanding, I felt like I've been in the presence a couple of times in my life and I've been completely undone. Like fall on the floor, completely undone. I obviously don't have enough integrity or righteousness that I could be a throat for God or something, because I just have been like thrown on the floor and like totally undone in all the good and bad ways, right? So so I just think about the ultimate like reconciliation of all things. And it's curious, like this bronze serpent thing you were talking about, David, which you go on to become an idol. What I love about that story is like they're grumbling and mumbling and like, oh God, it was better back there and stuff. And all of a sudden, God sends snakes and he's fighting them, and the children are dying and they're dying. And they go, hey, Moses, go pray to this God and get rid of these snakes. And he's like, no, get the bronze serpent, raise it up on the pole, and they look on it, they'll be healed. Like, he didn't remove the snakes.
Right, there you go.
There to
The
fight
snakes
people.
stuck around. There you go.
They stuck around. So, but if they looked on it, they were healed, right? Which is awesome.
Right.
But he doesn't remove Leviathan. He doesn't remove the snakes. Like all this stuff
Right.
that we think good, bad, right, wrong, in, out, heaven, hell, all this other sort of stuff. Just to stick to my landing, like all of this stuff is making us. And,
Right.
Matthew Pajot, I haven't been able to dig in deeply, but he's gone through the language of creation and he's got this language of renewal and he's talking about sleep and death. And like, I just feel like, and I think what people do really good, particularly in these sorts of conversations, is all of this stuff is making a new creation. We are all going somewhere. And I think there is this ultimate reconciliation of all things. It doesn't mean all things are the same. It's not coexist or any BS like that. But all of this stuff is making us, and it's about renewal. And the stuff that I'm most afraid of, and we know this in our individual life, the stuff I'm most afraid of are that's the stuff that freaking makes me. And I hate, like Job, like I hate that that's what ultimately exposed Job's ultimate righteousness, was all that suffering. And the other thing that I think, and I shared this with Jess, it was really powerful. And I've always read Job, and it certainly is this about, it seems like sufferings make us, but Jess has gone to this next level. I think what Job is really struggling with is the hiddenness of God. Like when we're not, and that, look at the fall, we lose the presence. And so, man, we just are grappling around here like, blind monkeys in the dark. And and then he's got all this wonderful stuff. And it seems to all be making us. But of all of it, I just, as you guys have been talking, and David, you've been all this stuff, I just feel, I have this deep inner tuning that ultimately God is working towards the reconciliation of all things.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I want to say this before I got to head out, but there's two bits about idolatry, because I think that some of the conversations that are right now happening in the corner, and how this kind of started, is the name of the golden calf. The golden calf, when it's created, they say, "This is Yahweh, the Elohim who brought you out of Egypt." Elohim, like, it's always translated as gods in English, but Elohim could be referred to as God singular. So the golden calf, they actually say, is Yahweh the God who brought you out of Egypt. That's how you could translate that you could actually turn God into an idol. And the second thing is that in the idea of Moses emptying himself, the Jewish tradition as to why we don't know, like there's no mention of where Moses is buried, is because Moses tells Joshua, I know these people. If you let them know where I'm buried, they will turn that spot into an idol. It'll become a shrine. They will worship my bones. So you tell them I'm out for milk, okay? And Moses goes and dies in the cave so that no one can turn him into a god.
Mm-hmm. And
Okay,
I think
I'm hopping out. I got to go.
Oh, too bad, David. No, I think we're always in danger of turning things into an idol. We can turn Bible sola scriptura into an idol. Like literally we can turn that into an idol, right? I've got icons behind me. I could turn that into an idol, right? I'm not, this is not a Protestant versus Ortho thing. That's not what I'm talking about, but I think that's really interesting. I can just say in my own life, I struggled with turning lots of things into idols. Like,
and those stories are just
drugs, alcohol, sex,
right.
Money, careers. You can turn family into an idol, like all these, even good things.
But those stories are they're there, and they also teach us, because, like I said, we had the capacity to do just the very same. And you mentioned it. Yeah, we can all stumble. We can easily fall into that idolatry where we lose sight of the real, right, the ultimate of realities. But because that's correct, the snakes are still left. We still struggle, and that's why as far as the parables of where the seeds falls on different soils and all that stuff, and it says that some people, because of the cares of the world, right, because of all the snakes that are still there, we get caught up, we lose sight, and before you know it, we're off the mark, right? We're heading down the wrong way, and so I'm gonna use what you guys have been saying about easily making that anything that is worthy into an idol, because we misunderstand it, is because I'm going to use something to compare it with, in something that's controversial in a way. So cults, right? Cults do that in a way that the way they recruit people is in a certain way to make them desire the cults, but at the same time they also restrict their individuality and restrict their ability to think for themselves, so they can never escape that. Once you get in, they don't want you to leave, and once you accept the leader, and you're never going to have any other leader, and whatever the leader says goes, and on it goes. So I'm going to use that to contrast. So when we stop listening to people just because they have different opinions, just because they come from different backgrounds, just because of different experiences, or just because they have a different interpretation of the same text we read, for instance, and when we stop listening, then we have to be careful, because Are we there to where we no longer are able to think for ourselves, and we're so afraid to listen to a concept that's outside of ourselves? Are we? It's just, I don't know. It's just a question that I have, and that's kind of what I've been seeing, but I could be wrong. What do you think about the concept? Am I way off?
Can I try to repeat back what you said? I see that
Sure.
Lance needs to go as well. If anyone wants to keep the string going, Lance is recruiting. By the way, hey Lance, hey Alex.
Hello.
I love how Hezzy does that. He comes out and sets the table. But hey Tayo. Yeah, I think Alex, you're basically saying that you can get to a point where you stop listening, and somehow that's connected to idolatry. It's the idolatry. It's kind of a sign or a fruit that you're doing it, is that you are no longer able to actually hear what the other person is saying. Is that what you're basically saying, Alex?
And yeah, that's kind of, but the reason, I guess, and then the question that would follow up is that why do we think that that there's so many of us? Why do we think that we're the only ones? See, that's where I was contrasting the cult mentality, because the leader doesn't want anybody else to think for themselves, because he supposedly, or they, like Jones or all the cults in the past, because that is the only truth they're allowed to have. They're not allowed to question those ideas. So when we get to the point where we stop listening, why do we seem to think that we are the only ones that are correct? If we are so, because I know I'm flawed, so how can I be correct in everything? And how can I, you know what I mean? How can I have somehow the ultimate truth when I'm so flawed? It doesn't make sense to me. But we seem, as in general, we seem to be stuck sometimes with not wanting to hear other people or other people's perceptions. And we don't have to agree with them, you know, we don't have to agree with them, but to even not want to hear, that's just, I don't know, that's weird to me.
Well, I think that's why it's important to try and live the things, not think about the things or try to do that. One of the things that I'm struck about that I really like is like 12-step programs. Oh, you'll have sponsors or people like that, but they'll say stuff is suggestive only, right? Like people who are really good sponsors won't tell you what to do. They'll listen. They might ask you some questions, but ultimately they realize like it's your life and you're going to have to go through it. The only way is through things, right? And so they'll suggest things. I think that's also something I've really liked. And I this is not Ortho versus Protestant. I've actually had a kind of one of my best friends who's like this, who was a disciple leader for me. But the one thing that's really struck me dealing with like my priest is like, I want him to give me some answers sometimes, and he never freaking gives me an answer. Like sometimes I'm kind of really good, like I'm coachable, I'll do what people say, and he'll just say, well, maybe this, maybe that, maybe think about this. And it's like, I want a freaking answer here. I'm coming, it's like, nope, not going to give you one. You have to figure this out on your own. But at least points me in directions, right? Hey, have you considered this? Would you think about doing this? Maybe, try this or that, just, but there's always like choices left in there. And that's the bet in many ways, like the break free. When you were talking, Alex, I know that's just very simplistic. Those are the sorts of things I was thinking about, and putting us in a posture of being open and being willing to have people that we will go take things to, listen to that. But then, I'd be very cautious. And that says a lot about me, that I'm looking for people to tell me things. Like many times I'm seeking like, hey, do this or that. And the fact of the matter is I'm hyper independent. Like I do what I want to do anyway, those sort of things. But it speaks about something to me. It's like, why am I wanting an answer? Right? Like, what's that in me? I just was thought about that. Like, ooh, that's interesting, Lance. Sometimes you just want an answer. Are you trying to get off the hook? Right? You're trying to get off the hook of something, or you're not willing to deal with the messiness of something or whatever. So I do think just in a practical sense, the very best folks that have helped me in my life have not given me the answers, but have helped me think through things and given me directional advice, if that makes sense. Pointing me to something.
Teo, sounded like you were going to say something earlier. Was there something that?
Oh, yes, but I'm glad I didn't, because Lance responded to your very earnest sentiment. I was just going to ignore it because I came on there with an agenda, mainly to say hello to Gavin, who I've not had a chance to interact with face to face in a while.
Gavin.
And also to say, Lance, I've missed you. Where have you been? And you gave me the responsibility of Discord, and Discord has been popping, but you've never showed up in it. Seems like everyone but Lance shows up on Discord, so I was coming to do some accountability stalking.
First off, that's perfect. That's the way it's supposed to work, right? So I'm glad to hear that. No, just work. And in fact, I need to leave now. My wife just went through a hip replacement surgery. So I've got a lot of stuff on my plate. So sometimes life comes at you, you need to focus on those things. But I've been listening from afar, not as much, but I plugged in. So that's the beautiful thing about this community. It doesn't, all of us are quote unquote replaceable, but I miss y'all. And
where's the Discord that we go and talk in after this? It's secret. It's a secret Discord. All right. We got
Lance, can you post it?
Are you on Bridges and Meaning?
Nah, I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not allowed there.
Really?
Oh, right.
Yeah, I'm not allowed
we need to get that fixed. Gavin needs to be replaced. That ban is long.
It might be a badge of honor.
All right, bye everyone.
See you, Lance.
Bye.